In Christopher Nolan's 2020 film Tenet, the first airport fight scene takes place relatively early on at the Oslo freeport, a secure storage facility adjacent to the airport. The sequence unfolds during an infiltration mission led by the protagonist, John David Washington, and Neil, Robert Pattinson. Their objective is to steal a Goya painting owned by Andrzej Sader. By doing so, they hope to win the trust of Sader's wife, Kat, and free her from her husband's blackmail. Kat had mistakenly authenticated the piece, unaware it was actually a forgery painted by a man named Aripo. Destroying the fake Goya would eliminate Sader's leverage over Kat, allowing the protagonist to maintain his connection with her, and, by extension, with Sader himself. During the operation, which is triggered by a staged plane crash to activate the facility's alarms and release a halon gas suppressant, they couldn't find the painting removed by Sader, but they discover a hidden room containing temporal turnstiles. Suddenly, two masked, heavily geared men emerge. One engages the protagonist in combat, while the other is pursued by Neil. The fight is bizarre, almost reverse choreographed, featuring movements that defy standard physics. The protagonist ultimately stabs his masked opponent in the shoulder before both intruders manage to escape. This sequence serves as a visual development to the film's core concept of time inversion or reverse entropy, without fully explaining it just yet. During this claustrophobic and brutal brawl, the protagonist faces off against a masked man in tactical gear whose fighting style is oddly inverted. His movements seem to flow backward, as if the film itself were playing in reverse. The fight ends when the protagonist stabs the mysterious adversary in the shoulder. Later in the film, it is revealed that this masked man was actually the protagonist himself, traveling backward through time from the future. It is a literal battle against oneself, where two versions of the same character coexist in the exact same moment, but move in opposite temporal directions. What initially appears chaotic on a first viewing becomes a perfectly synchronized time loop once the concept fully unfolds. Conceptual analysis now. This scene stands as an example of how the film materializes ideas on time, destiny, and causality, illustrating several concepts. In Tenet, inversion reverses the entropy of an object or a person. For a human being, this means they continue to exist, but move in the opposite direction of time, from the future toward the past. The fight offers a concrete demonstration of what this implies physically. The punches, jumps, breathing, and even interactions with the environment appear reversed to an observer moving normally forward. It is a visualization of the relativity of time and the thermodynamic arrow. What's happened is a mantra of the film. This mantra takes on its full meaning here. The protagonist does not decide to fight his future self. He already has, and he will. The brawl is a closed loop where cause and effect intertwine. The knife wound the protagonist inflicts on his opponent later becomes the very injury he feels when he undergoes inversion himself. There is no paradox. Everything is predetermined and self-consistent, at least when you do not dive too deeply into the questioning. This scene seemingly turns free will into an illusion while paradoxically preserving the character's agency. This strangeness introduces a tragic undertone. The characters willingly sacrifice themselves to a force they choose to submit to, solely to respect the causal loop and prevent a reality-shattering paradox. For instance, if the protagonist were to accidentally kill his future self during the Oslo fight, it would prevent him from ever founding the Tenet organization later on. This would hand victory to the villain, Sader, and ultimately lead to the destruction of the world. Symbolically, the protagonist is literally battling his future self. This represents ultimate inner conflict, the necessity of confronting one's own future actions, and the idea that our most dangerous enemy is sometimes ourselves or our choices. The film uses the mask and tactical gear to delay the reveal, creating a payoff that highly rewards several viewings. When breathing while moving against the normal flow of time, you need a mask to breathe reversed air. This is the trick. The film director had the actors rehearse their movements backwards so that, when filmed and inverted, they would look natural in the opposite temporal direction. The scene was shot twice, once for each direction of time. The audience experiences the protagonist's utter confusion, deeply reinforcing the immersion. Ultimately, it takes more than 2 viewings to fully resonate with a sequence that, due to its lack of hand-holding exposition, is designed above all to mystify and awe first, and then only to help understand what reverse entropy means concretely for humans. A detailed breakdown now. Why 3 protagonists in the Oslo scene? In the Oslo freeport sequence, the movie isn't just showing 2 versions of the protagonist fighting. A closer look and repeat viewings reveal 3 distinct instances of the exact same character, in the same place at the same time. It is a subtle detail, but absolutely crucial to the film's temporal logic. The 3 coexisting protagonists. 1. The forward and past protagonist, the normal version with the tie and suit. This is the version we follow from the beginning of the film alongside Neil. He wears civilian clothes, is not yet inverted, and experiences the scene in chronological order. He is the one who discovers the turnstile and fights the masked man. 2. The inverted future protagonist, the masked version. This is the version that emerges from the turnstile moving backward through time. He wears tactical gear and a mask, and fights in a reversed manner. He is the exact same man, but a few days later in his personal timeline, having inverted in Tallinn and traveled backward in time to return to Oslo. 3. The uninverted future protagonist, the version chased by Neil. After fighting his past self, the inverted protagonist enters the turnstile again to revert back to normal time, uninvert. This creates a third version, a normal moving version from the protagonist of the future, who runs away, gets chased by Neil, and is unmasked by him. For a brief window of time, all 3 versions of the protagonist coexist within the Oslo freeport. To understand how 3 versions of the same man can coexist in the same room, you have to stop thinking of time as a straight line and start picturing it as a highway with multiple lanes and U-turns. Here is a simple yet rigorous breakdown of what is actually happening at the Oslo airport. 1. Who exactly are these 3 protagonists? To wrap your head around this, you need to follow the protagonist's personal timeline, as if you were looking at his own wristwatch. From his own perspective, he never clones himself. He simply experiences events sequentially, one after the other. However, to us observers anchored in Oslo, his trajectory creates 3 simultaneous versions. Protagonist A. This is our hero from the beginning of the film. He is moving normally through time, from past to future, and doesn't even know what inversion is yet. He enters the room and gets ambushed by a masked man. Protagonist B, the inverted version. This is our hero from later in the film. He has traveled into the future, experienced specific events, and then used a machine to make a U-turn and travel backward through time, from future to past. He returns to Oslo moving in reverse. To hide his identity from his past self, the protagonist A, he puts on a black tactical suit and a mask. But this is also to breathe while being inversed. He is the one fighting protagonist A. Protagonist C, the re-forwarded version. This is protagonist B. Just a minute later. After fighting protagonist A, the inverted version, B, leaps into the Oslo temporal turnstile to make another U-turn, reverting himself back to moving normally through time, from past to future. He is protagonist C, the one who bursts out running, gets chased down by Neil, and is unmasked. Two. How is this apparent incoherency possible? The temporal turnstile doesn't create clones. It works like a mirror or a fold in a ribbon. Imagine drawing a continuous line on a sheet of paper. You draw toward the right, protagonist A. You fold the paper back and draw toward the left, protagonist B. You fold it again and draw toward the right once more, protagonist C. If you make a vertical cut through those folds, your eyes see three parallel lines in the exact same spot, yet they belong to one and the same pencil stroke. The exact timeline of the scene in the room. During the few minutes the fight takes place, time folds in on itself. In that single room there is simultaneously protagonist A moving forward, protagonist B moving backward, protagonist C moving forward again. This explains Neil's highly unusual reaction during the sequence. When he pursues protagonist C and pulls off his mask, he discovers the protagonist's face. Neil immediately understands the time loop, which is why he stops protagonist A from shooting the mask. If protagonist A killed him, he would be killing his own future self, protagonist B and C. In summary, this isn't magic, nor is it a plot hole. It is the exact same man at three different points in his life, separated by just a few days, intersecting at the same geographical location coordinate in spacetime, taking into account that traveling to the past is possible, which in reality is not possible, as you know. Neil explicitly brings up the Feynman-Wheeler concept shortly afterward when discussing inversion, the idea that a positron, an antiparticle, is nothing more than an electron traveling backward through time. In actual physics, specifically Feynman's interpretation of Feynman diagrams, an antiparticle is the exact same particle, just with its temporal arrow reversed. Wheeler took this concept even further with his highly speculative one-electron universe hypothesis. He suggested that there might be only one single electron in the entire universe, infinitely zigzagging back and forth between the past and the future. Every time it moves toward the future, we perceive it as an electron. When it moves toward the past, we perceive it as a positron. TENET tries to apply this exact framework to a human scale. The protagonist is not cloned by the turnstile. He is the same individual whose temporal arrow has been reversed. The Oslo fight is the macroscopic equivalent of a particle interacting with itself at different points along its own world line. The three visible protagonists correspond to 3 points on the same curved temporal trajectory of a single protagonist particle. One segment moving forward normally, version 1. One segment traveling backward, version 2, inverted. The causal link closing the loop, version 3, completing the reinversion. There is no paradox because, much like in the Wheeler-Feynman absorber theory, there is no infinite self-interaction. Instead, everything is a direct interaction between different moments of the exact same object. The knife wound to the shoulder, the bullet holes in the glass, the fact that the protagonist B saves his past self A by emptying his weapon. All of these elements belong to a single, self-consistent lifeline. This is precisely why the film insists on the mantra, "What's happened, happened." Ultimately, the Oslo scene stands as visual demonstration of the film's core concept. Inversion is not traditional time travel. Rather, it is the reorientation of the entropic and temporal arrow of a single object or person. Simultaneously, it is both a directorial tour de force and an elegant, albeit loose, transposition of relativistic quantum physics into an action thriller. Watching the protagonist fight himself, we come to realize we are watching a particle, Why does the masked, inverted protagonist shoot into the glass? The inverted protagonist, coming from the future of protagonist A, intentionally fires inverted bullets toward his past self and into the glass. This is done for strategic reasons and to preserve the causal loop. It is neither a suicide attempt nor a mistake. It is a calculated act. Here is why he fires. From the inverted protagonist's perspective, the masked version from the future, protagonist B. He knows exactly what is going to happen, or rather what has already happened from his perspective, because he has already experienced it as his past self. He needs to reach the turnstile to continue his backward journey through time and complete his mission. His past self, the protagonist A in civilian clothes, is blocking his path and is about to shoot him with a normal weapon. By firing his inverted gun into the glass and toward his past self, he achieves several things simultaneously. 1. First thing achieved by B. He empties his magazine in a controlled manner. From his inverted point of view, he shoots the bullets into the glass, causing the holes to appear. However, from the forward perspective, the opposite occurs. The bullets fly out of the glass and back into the gun. By emptying the weapon, he ensures his past self cannot use it against him with lethal effect later in the fight. It is a safety measure. 2. Second thing achieved by B. He forces his past self to move. The gunfire and the chaos of the brawl push the past protagonist toward the turnstile, exactly where he needs to be for the loop to close properly. 3. Third thing achieved by B. He respects the rule what's happened, happened. He cannot kill his past self. Doing so would mean he would cease to exist to perform everything that follows. The shots are therefore never meant to hit a lethal target. It is a carefully choreographed interaction with his own history. As previously established, the inverted protagonist acts like a positron, antiparticle, relative to his normal self, the electron. The interaction between the two versions is a form of self-interaction across time. The inverted bullet represents a forward versus retrograde interaction. It heals the glass from a forward perspective, even though it damaged it from an inverted perspective. The shooting is thus entirely consistent with time symmetry. There is no creation of bullets or holes ex nihilo. Everything is a closed loop of effects traveling in both directions of time. In short, the inverted future protagonist fires to effectively defuse the situation, force his past self into the correct position, and prevent his past self from accidentally killing him with a normal bullet. He is playing his part in the loop. He knows he must lose this fight by getting stabbed and make it into the turnstile. It is an act of ultimate temporal self-mastery. He is literally manipulating himself so that everything unfolds exactly as it must. The hero isn't fighting an external enemy. He is orchestrating his own causality while wrestling with his past ignorance.
Technical and narrative breakdown now. 1. In the first presentation of the scene by the beginning of the movie, forward or past perspective, we follow A. the normal protagonist in civilian clothes. His opponent, the inverted future version, moves in a highly unnatural way. He seems to jump backward, his strikes land before the motion completes, he catches bullets, and so on. However, the normal protagonist, the well-dressed protagonist, himself, also makes movements that appear somewhat forced or unusually choreographed. It is not a standard fight scene by any means. 2. In the second presentation by the end of the movie, inverted future perspective, we watch the exact same scene, but this time from the viewpoint of the masked protagonist. From his perspective, he is the one moving fluidly and normally, while his opponent, the past protagonist, now appears to be fighting in a bizarre, reversed fashion. Both combatants exhibit movements that appear strange, depending on which perspective the viewer is locked into at that specific moment in the film. When two people move in opposite directions through time, every action performed by one is perceived as reversed by the other. A punch thrown by the inverted person is seen as a fist being withdrawn by the forward person, and vice versa. Everything is relative to the observer's specific arrow of time. To capture this accurately on screen, the filming crew utilized a precise method. They choreographed the fight twice, once for the forward version and once for the inverted version. The actors literally learned to perform their movements in reverse, much like a dancer rehearsing a routine backward. Depending on which version was being shown, the sequence was either played normally or reversed in the editing room. No matter which side of the timeline you watch the scene from, both bodies appear to be fighting standard physics at one point or another. This is exactly what would happen in reality if two people with opposing arrows of time engaged in hand-to-hand combat. The film constantly plays with our perception. First Oslo scene, forward perspective. The inverted opponent mainly appears monstrous and supernatural. Second Oslo scene, now the forward opponent, the well-dressed protagonist mainly, is the one who appears bizarre.
And now arrives the detailed breakdown and analysis of the second Oslo fight scene. This second iteration of the fight stands as one of the film's revelations, completely transforming our understanding of the initial scene. Following the events in Tallinn, where Kat is shot with an inverted bullet, the protagonist, Neil, and Kat invert themselves and travel backward through time to the Oslo freeport. They journey inside an inverted shipping container to arrive at the exact moment of the original heist. This second scene reveals that the masked man from the first scene was indeed the protagonist himself, hailing from the future. Movements from the first encounter now make perfect sense: the knife wound to the arm, the gunfire attempts, the bizarre kinetics. The past protagonist catches a glimpse of his own face behind the mask, realizing too late that he was fighting himself. Neil steps in to stop the past version from firing, knowing the inverted protagonist must survive to complete his mission. Neil pulls off the mask, because the protagonist is again in the normal flow of time. He has gone through the turnstile again. He does not need the mask any longer to breathe. Inversion reverses a person's individual entropy, their body, clothes, the air in their lungs, etc. Once inverted, the protagonist breathes inverted air, meaning the air he exhales travels toward the past. The mask and tactical gear primarily serve to protect the user during the initial inversion process and to facilitate breathing within a normal environment, where ambient air flows toward the future, and also to prevent thermal anomalies, like inverted fire or cold, and ambient contamination. This second scene proves the film provided lots of clues during the first encounter, deliberately withholding the context. It beautifully illustrates the closed causal loop. The protagonist must battle himself so that history unfolds exactly as it already has. Neil's role is pivotal. He acts as the guardian of the loop. Having already unmasked the future protagonist, he knows exactly who he is dealing with. He protects and guides his partner without ever revealing the truth too soon. The act of the protagonist stabbing himself in the shoulder creates a wound that travels through time. It manifests on his body as he approaches the inversion point, eventually fading into a scar he will carry forward. It is a stunning visual metaphor for the continuity of one's lifeline, regardless of shifting temporal directions. In summary, the second scene is far from a mere repetition, it is the exact same event viewed from the opposite side of the temporal looking glass. It redefines a chaotic, mysterious skirmish into an intimate confrontation with one's own identity. The sequence seems consistent, yet it ultimately asks the audience to take a leap of faith. Because the film's exposition remains intentionally sparse, it appeals to our sense of awe rather than to our reason first.
What actually happens? What is the single event? There is only ever one fight inside the Oslo freeport. This single battle pits two versions of the exact same protagonist against each other at the exact same moment. The past protagonist, the one in civilian clothes moving forward normally through time. The inverted future protagonist, the masked one, traveling backward through time. The past protagonist's perspective. During the heist, the protagonist and Neil enter the turnstile room. They find a glass pane already riddled with bullet holes and a gun lying on the floor. Suddenly, a masked man in black tactical gear, the inverted future protagonist, ambushes the protagonist. The fight feels incredibly bizarre. The opponent moves as though the film were playing in reverse. The protagonist manages to stab him in the shoulder. The masked man then draws his weapon and shoots into the glass, the bullets seemingly flying the wrong way. Outside, Neil intervenes, pulls off the mask, and discovers his friend's face. He immediately stops the past protagonist from shooting the masked man, who then escapes into the turnstile. At this stage of the film, the entire sequence feels completely incomprehensible. And now the solution given by the inverted future protagonist's perspective. Following the events in Tallinn, the protagonist intentionally inverts himself using the same turnstile to travel back to the moment of the heist. He emerges masked and inverted. He is now the mysterious attacker we saw earlier. From his point of view, he sees his past self in civilian clothes, moving in a bizarre, reversed fashion. He fights not to kill, but to continue his backward journey through time. He fires his inverted weapon into the glass, creating the hole seen earlier, in order to protect his past self, the well-dressed man with a suit and a tie. His past self stabs him in the shoulder, the exact same wound. Neil pulls off his mask, exposing his face to his past self. Neil prevents the fatal shot. He finally steps into the turnstile to uninvert himself. In conclusion, the first scene shows the fight from a perspective of total ignorance. The past protagonist has no idea who he is dealing with. The second scene shows the exact same fight from a perspective of absolute knowledge. The future protagonist knows precisely what he must do to close the loop. Everything aligns almost flawlessly. The knife wound, the bullet holes in the glass, Neil's intervention, and the escape into the turnstile. These are not two separate fights, but the exact same conflict viewed from two opposing temporal directions. This is what makes the scene so enigmatic. The first time you are completely lost. The second time, everything clicks into place a little bit better, and so on. The protagonist, Neil and Kate. Why they absolutely have to return to Oslo at that exact moment. Kat is facing a death sentence. It all stems from the shootout in Tallinn. Sater, the villain, shoots his wife, Kat, with an inverted bullet. In the TENET universe, a wound from an inverted bullet is 100% fatal within a matter of hours. Why? Because the bullet is traveling backward through time, meaning its radiation and physical wreckage tear through Kat's body continuously. Standard medicine is completely useless against it. The solution: a temporal healing window. To save Kat, Neil and the protagonist employ an emergency strategy: immediate inversion. They immediately put her through the Tallinn turnstile. By entering the inverted stream, Kat's body begins traveling into the past. This essentially freezes the ongoing radiation damage from the bullet, buying her body the several days it needs to heal while moving backward. But there is a massive catch. Why return to Oslo specifically? Once Kat has spent a few days inverted and has successfully healed, she absolutely must uninvert to resume her normal life and move forward into the future again. If she stays inverted, she will continue traveling backward into the past, permanently isolated from the rest of the world. To uninvert, they need a temporal turnstile. The problem? The Tallinn turnstile is now entirely controlled by Sater's men. There is no going back there. They are stuck in the past with no machine at their disposal. That is when the protagonist remembers, wait, a week ago, when we pulled the heist at the Oslo airport, we discovered a secret turnstile inside the freeport. They decide to spend a week hidden inside an inverted shipping container, traveling backward through time with Kat on a stretcher, to intercept the Oslo turnstile at the exact moment of their original heist. Summary of intentions now. They return to Oslo for 3 very simple reasons. 1. Access to the machine. It is the only safe, non-SATA monitored turnstile they know to exist in the past. 2. The perfect cover. By arriving at the exact moment their past selves crash the plane and trigger the halon gas in the freeport, they know the facility's security will be in absolute chaos. This allows them to slip in undetected by airport staff. 3. Closing the loop. To get Kat moving forward in time again, they must use this specific turnstile. For the protagonist, this means he must fight his past self to gain access to the machine. In a nutshell, they return to Oslo to use the airport's time-bending machine to transition a healed Kat back into normal time, capitalizing on the very chaos they themselves engineered a week prior. There is only ever one fight inside the Oslo freeport. This single battle pits 2 versions of the exact same protagonist against each other, in the same place and at the same moment. First version. Beginning of the film, we follow the past protagonist, in civilian clothes, moving through normal time. A mysterious masked man ambushes him. The fight appears chaotic and inverted. The protagonist stabs his opponent in the shoulder. Neil pulls off the mask, and the masked man escapes into the turnstile. Second version. Later in the film, we follow the inverted future protagonist, masked. He is the mysterious attacker. He experiences the exact same fight, but this time from his own perspective. His past self moves in a bizarre fashion. He fires into the glass, gets stabbed, Neil pulls off his mask, and he steps into the turnstile to continue his journey. Key takeaway. Both scenes depict the exact same event, simply observed from 2 opposing arrows of time. And now a summary of the physics breakdown. The film director draws direct inspiration from the Wheeler-Feynman absorber theory and the one-electron universe hypothesis to construct this sequence. The particle concept. Richard Feynman and John Archibald Wheeler proposed that a positron, an antiparticle, is nothing more than an electron traveling backward through time. The single-particle universe. In their most extreme hypothesis, they suggested that only one single particle might exist in the entire universe, zigzagging back and forth between the past and the future. What we perceive as 2 distinct entities, a particle and an antiparticle, is actually one and the same entity, viewed at different points along its temporal trajectory. In TENET, the protagonist is treated exactly like this single particle. His normal version represents the electron moving toward the future. His inverted version represents the positron, the exact same him moving toward the past. The Oslo fight is the macroscopic visualization of this concept. The protagonist is interacting with himself at two different points along his own world line. There is no paradox here, as it is a coherent, self-contained temporal interaction, mirroring the behavior found in Feynman diagrams. Other physics concepts now. First, time symmetry. The fundamental laws of physics, particularly in quantum mechanics and electrodynamics, are time-symmetric. The film makes this symmetry tangible. The fight sequence holds up in both temporal directions. Second, causal loops and the absence of paradoxes. Within this framework of physics, events form self-consistent loops. The bullet holes in the glass, the knife wound, Neil's intervention, every element is mathematically necessary for the protagonist to eventually become the person who carries out those exact actions later on. Third, observer relativity. Much like in relativity theory, whether an action appears normal or inverted depends entirely on the observer's temporal frame of reference. This explains why both combatants exhibit bizarre movements depending on whose perspective the audience is tracking.
Again, a summary, an easy one. At the start, the turnstile is empty. Suddenly, two masked protagonists in black gear emerge from it at the same time, the visual equivalent of particle-antiparticle pair creation in quantum physics. One is the inverted protagonist, experiencing time backward, like the antiparticle. The other is the protagonist who has just reinverted, returning to forward time. The suited protagonist, the past version, then fights his inverted double, whose movements look chaotic and backward. Meanwhile, Neil takes down the other version, the reinverted protagonist running forward, but does not kill him, because he knows it is his future ally. Now, from the protagonist's own point of view, his linear lifeline, he arrives inverted from the future, after being inverted in Tallinn with Kat and Neil to save her. He enters the Oslo freeport and fights his own past self, in a suit, who sees him as a masked enemy. At the end of the fight, he enters the turnstile. The turnstile reinverts him. He immediately exits the other side, now moving forward in time, but he runs out, chased by Neil, who, from Neil's perspective, sees a normal protagonist exiting. It is because these two phases of his life, inverted and then reinverted, intersect exactly when he uses the turnstile that outside observers perceive two people suddenly appearing out of nowhere.
And now some final thoughts for the moment. Moving an object necessarily means changing its previous state. Claiming the opposite is a physical absurdity. If we push the film's logic to its limit, TENET tries to reconcile two incompatible levels. Local microscopic physics. When you arrive in a room while inverted, you push air, release heat or cold, depending on the direction, and leave traces. You do alter the state of the environment compared to the microsecond before. The film assumes that the final outcome of your actions was already written into the single immutable history of the universe. The giant problem is the butterfly effect, extreme sensitivity to initial conditions in chaotic systems. Moving even a few air molecules in the past can, through a chain reaction, alter the trajectories of other particles, change the weather days or weeks later, and potentially modify macroscopic events, meetings, decisions, etc. In the long run, this could rewrite the future from which the inverted traveler came. For the TENET universe to remain consistent without creating alternate timelines or paradoxes, it must implicitly assume that the universe has some form of correction or robustness. Small local perturbations are absorbed or compensated in such a way that the key events, those that matter to the plot, occur exactly as they have always occurred. This is a classic narrative convention in single-timeline time loop stories. From a strictly physical and thermodynamic point of view, the idea, I act on inverted matter, but changed nothing in the overall course of events, is a contradiction. It is the price to pay for a film scenario to remain understandable and dramatically effective without collapsing into a multiverse or unsolvable paradoxes. This fictional convention, rather than scientific rigor, makes a movie understandable, even if sometimes you may prefer not try to understand the coherence. You may prefer feel the movie instead.